Hey, this is Taylor T. Carlson, and this is my first video that I'm doing. I've been writing reviews, lists, articles, so forth for well over a decade now, but I think it's time to get into doing a YouTube channel finally. And for my first video, since Dark Phoenix just came out, I figured why not start reviewing the X-Men movies? Why not do a list ranking my favorite films in the series? We got about 10 movies total I'm pulling from in this list, and it's been a long and interesting ride, but Fox has been bought out by Disney, and they're going to be rebooting these characters soon. So, also, decent warning ahead of time, there will be spoilers in this list. If you have not seen any of these movies, please come back after you've seen them. A few things to get out of the way before I begin the list. First and foremost, I am not including the Deadpool films in this countdown. Those films are more comedic, they break the fourth wall, they have a fun time with what they do. They're not really part of the core series, and they don't take themselves seriously, which is honestly part of the reason I love them so much. I mean, I adore these movies, and you'll probably see me talking about them in a future video, but here we're just going to cover the main series. Additionally, I'm also not including the New Mutants spin-off film in this countdown. Obviously, that film has not been released yet as of the time I'm doing this video, but it's also supposed to be a spin-off, and I don't believe it's supposed to have any connection to the main film franchise. I will certainly be reviewing that film when it does come out, but again, not including it in this countdown. I am not in any way rating the films based on their accuracy to the comic books. I have a vague familiarity with the comic books, and I was a fan of the animated series as a child, but again, that's not something I'm taking under consideration here. It basically comes down to how much did I enjoy the movies? Why did I enjoy the movies? Did I not enjoy them? Original comic book source material is not being taken under consideration here, as I simply don't know enough about it. Just a reminder as well, this list is for entertainment purposes only. Your opinions will probably vary from mine. If you have a difference in opinion, you want to tell me what your favorite film is, please share it on the comments section below. I'd love to hear your opinions. Just please keep it civil. That's all I ask. Without further ado, let's get started. At the bottom of the list, we have number 10, X-Men Origins Wolverine. The biggest problem I have with this movie is there's simply no reason for it to exist. It's a prequel, but we pretty much already learned everything we need to know about Wolverine in the other films to date. The best thing about this movie is its opening credits sequence, which features Wolverine and his brother, later to be known as Sabretooth, fighting in wars over the course of a century. You see them in the Civil War, World War I, World War II, and then it picks up the movie with them out in Vietnam on a special ops assignment, and unfortunately that opening credits sequence is pretty much the best part of the whole movie. The film was also infamous for its treatment of the Deadpool character, Wade Wilson. It does stuff with that character that just, it was not well critically received, and needless to say, became the butt of a lot of jokes in the Deadpool movies. Another long-awaited character in the X-Men franchise, Gambit, makes his first and only appearance in this movie, and it too is a bit of a disappointment. There are a few decent action sequences in this film, and I certainly wouldn't say that I hate it, but as far as the X-Men films go, I do have to put this one in dead last. At number 9, we have X-Men The Last Stand. This was the third and final film in the original trilogy of movies, and it was the first one not to be directed by Bryan Singer. This movie tries to incorporate the Dark Phoenix and the Gifted plot from the comics, which deals with a mutant cure. Unfortunately, trying to shoehorn so many characters and two major comic arcs into one movie ultimately was kind of a disaster. The actors in this film are all great. We get the usual excellent performances from the likes of Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart, but not all of the casting fared too well. Vinnie Jones' portrayal of Juggernaut was the subject of quite a bit of ridicule. Honestly, I find the character pretty entertaining, but probably not in the way that's most appropriate for this kind of storyline. I will give the movie credit for having quite a bit of social commentary. One of the things I like more about this franchise than just about any other movie franchise out there, but it just comes down to the fact that this feels more like
a showcase of one-off mutants who get to show off an ability, and they don't do much. The movie makes a really big deal in its early scenes of introducing the character of Angel, but ultimately it does nothing with the character. He's on the sidelines for the whole movie and basically does nothing. I was debating between putting this or Origins Wolverine at the bottom of this list, and ultimately, this movie's a little shorter, and I'd say it's at least slightly more intelligent, so I do have to give the nod to this one, though it's still pretty close to the bottom of the barrel as far as X-Men movies go. At number 8 on this list, we have The Wolverine. This was the first of 2 Wolverine solo movies that were directed by James Mangold. He'd go on to create a much better one, but we'll get to that later in the countdown. Ultimately, this movie sees Wolverine in Japan with something in his body that makes him vulnerable to attacks and unable to regenerate. The problem with this movie, I admire its stripped-down ambition and wanting to tell a more human story, but the problem here is it's just kind of boring. The cast in this movie is largely comprised of 2 factions of rival human characters who both become enemies to Wolverine as he tries to protect a girl who's supposed to inherit her father's company. A lot of family drama there, and the movie goes against its own stripped-down stylings when it takes us to CGI hell for a big finale that pretty much betrays everything the rest of the movie stood for. So while I do admire certain things about this film, unfortunately, I can't really put it higher on the list. There's a few great action sequences, and we do get to see a slightly more human side to the franchise, but again, it just doesn't quite work, and I really find myself coming back to this movie less than any other in the franchise. At number 7 on this list, we have X-Men Apocalypse. This was the 3rd movie in the rebooted timeline that started with First Class, and unfortunately, there's a character in the movie who makes a wisecrack about how 3rd movies in a series are always the worst, and that's kind of how I feel about this one, at least in regard to the films in that particular timeline. In a lot of ways, this movie makes the same mistakes that X-Men The Last Stand made, in that it simply tries to shoehorn in too many plot elements, too many mutants. We get to see a few mutants show off their powers, and that's pretty much all they do in the entire movie. And the design for Apocalypse, Ensabanur, whatever you want to call the guy, I just was not a fan of the design. He looks a little too similar to Ivan Ooze from the Power Rangers movie, and that was just distracting for me throughout. The best thing about this movie is the performance from Michael Fassbender as Eric Lehnsherr, Magneto. He's definitely been the standout for me throughout the entire franchise, and we really get to see his whole side as to why he hates the human race, and this movie does that with a vengeance, even if it suffers a lot in other areas. Sadly, I can't put this one higher on the list despite it doing a few things pretty well. But every movie from this point onward is genuinely a good film. Next up on the list, we have X-Men from the year 2000. This was the first movie in the whole franchise, and needless to say, this had a lot to live up to. For a lot of people, this was their introduction to the X-Men, and it does a pretty good job with its world building. It has a largely original screenplay, not based on any explicit comic book story. Don't quote me on that, because again, I'm not an expert on the comics, but the performances from Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen are great. You get to deal with the mutant persecution, everything these characters go through. You see conflicting sides of the viewpoints, and really, I think it paints both of them in a pretty good overall way. You got a great climax, great performances from just about all of the actors. It does feel a little too much like a setup for future installments, but as the movie that was meant to introduce us to this world, I've got to say, I like it. It did its job well, and about 20 years later, aside from a few of the special effects looking a little dated, I do still love this film. At number 5 on this list, we have Dark Phoenix. This film was just released, and it's already taking a lot of negative critic reviews, and for the life of me, I don't really see why. I thought this was an excellent film with a great continuation to this particular timeline and storyline. It's an adaptation of the Dark Phoenix film, which we'd previously seen done questionably in X-Men The Last Stand. But again, this is going to be the last time we see a lot of these characters, and I think it's a fitting farewell. It has some of the best action sequences in the whole franchise, including a scene on a train, which I will easily put amongst my favorite scenes in the whole X-Men series. The one complaint I had with this movie is that Jessica Chastain is really wasted as kind of a one-dimensional, shape-shifting alien villain. I would like to have spent a little more time with them, gotten to know those characters a little better, but still, overall, I give this one a very positive review. At number 4 on the list, we have X2, X-Men United. This was the second movie in the franchise, and basically, it takes everything we loved about the first film and dials it up to 11. We get a much more gripping plot this time around, and Magneto's Brotherhood and Professor Xavier's School of Mutants have to join forces to go up against a villain who wants to kill all the mutants in the world, and the result is some of the best action sequences in the entire series. We get to delve a little more into Wolverine's past. Honestly, I think this movie does that better than a lot of movies that focus on Wolverine as a solo character. There is just a lot to love about this film. It turns the stakes up. Maybe a few characters don't quite get the emphasis they should, but I will easily rank this amongst one of my favorite in the series, and I doubt any fan would be disappointed watching this film. At number 3 on this list, we have Logan. Remember I told you earlier in this list, James Mangold directed 2 Wolverine movies and a better one was to come later? This was that movie. I was not a fan of the previous 2 Wolverine movies, especially when you consider that they're pretty near the bottom of this list. This movie actually has an R rating. It cranks it up with the violence. It has a much more gripping storyline. You have Wolverine coming to terms with who he is. He's old, he's dying, he's not the mutant he once was. He meets a young female mutant who was made from his DNA, so in a way, she's his daughter, and he ends up being tasked with trying to get her away from a greedy company who wants to destroy the work they've been doing experiments on mutants. And the film has one of the most dramatic finales, of course. Unfortunately, he does pass away at the end of the film from his wounds, but it's his last attempt at the role. It's Patrick Stewart's last film as Charles Xavier. Both actors could not be better. I absolutely love this film, even if the midsection drags a little bit and the villains aren't the most interesting, but for what it is, this film is phenomenal. At number 2 on this list, we have X-Men First Class. This movie was coming off the heels of The Last Stand and Origins Wolverine, which are 2 of the worst films in the series. A lot of people had given up hope on the X-Men franchise at this point, and then, bam, they give us what is, to me, one of the best films in the entire franchise. We get to see young Magneto, what he went through, really find out why he hates the human race so much, and how he deals with persecution. We also get to meet young Charles Xavier, who's just coming out of college and is trying to pick up women in bars. We get to hear him using the word groovy almost as much as Austin Powers, and it's actually pretty damn funny. Kind of hard to believe this becomes the character played by Patrick Stewart in the later films. They incorporate history into the plot, which was something I really liked. They have to deal with the Cuban Missile Crisis, and meanwhile, Eric Magneto wants to go find the man who turned him into what he is, get his revenge, and at the end of the film, you inevitably know that Charles and Eric are going to part ways, but this film actually paints Eric as a sympathetic character despite his actions and who he will later become. It's easily one of my favorite movies in the franchise. It's just fun to watch. And at number 1, topping off the list, X-Men Days of Future Past. This was the movie that brought together both of the timelines. You have the older versions of the characters, the younger versions of the characters. In the future, it's truly become an apocalyptic setting. You have Sentinels sent to hunt down mutants, and very few mutants are left, so they come up with a plan to send Wolverine back in time, put his consciousness in his 1973 body, where he has to go unite Eric and Charles, who couldn't be farther apart, fighting each other. And needless to say, it's action-packed, it's gripping, it's intelligent, it's a lot of fun. Tough to pick a favorite X-Men movie, but for me, this is number 1. It's got some of the best action scenes in the series, some of the best drama, great special effects, and once again, they work history into the plot, which I thought was a nice touch.
Do you agree with my list? Like I said, comment below, let me know what you think. What's your favorite X-Men film? What's your least favorite? I'm Taylor T. Carlson. This is the end of the video, and hit the like or subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.